Congratulations to you. So I've been a little bit late today because I had a meeting with some external ministry of Indian government, some retired officers, and we discussed about the Tibetan situation today and the relationship between Tibet and India and all this. So because of this, I was a little bit late. I'm sorry about this. As we discussed yesterday, I said we have to become 21st century Buddhists. So from the point of view of followers with sharp faculty, we have to first understand the Dharma. So the very term Chu in Tibetan, or Dharma in Sanskrit, means to protect us. So the understanding of emptiness, or the understanding or view of interdependence, which is unique to Buddhism. No other religious tradition or other traditions have this view. And this view of interdependence is something which is a fact and reality. So you don't have to rely on mere faith, but anybody can understand that things arise or come about through dependence on other factors. So therefore, when you understand this interdependent nature of things, you'll understand the causality of things, that effects arise from causes. And then we also come to the conclusion of understanding or the practice of taking up the causes which bring about happiness and avoiding or overcoming the causes which bring about suffering. So what is the significance of this understanding of interdependent nature of things? In the 70 stanzas of Nagarjuna, he says, and so independence on ignorance, the fundamental ignorance about the nature of causality, and dependence on that, the rest of this 12 links, the 11 factors in the 12-link dependent origination arises. So in the depiction of the 12 links in the paintings, you will see in the center of the painting the three animals, the pig, a bird, and a snake. And so these represent the three poisons of attachment, ignorance, and anger or hatred. And so when we count the 12 links of dependent origination, we have the first, that of ignorance, which leads to that of the karmic formation, and then consciousness and so forth. So of course nobody wants suffering, but everyone wants happiness. But we cause ourselves sufferings because of ignorance about what causes or brings about happiness and what are the causes for suffering. And therefore, with regard to ignorance itself, with the first link, the ignorance is the ignorance about the true nature of things, the reality as it is. In other words, things are dependently originated or arising, whereas to our mind, the things which are caused by causes and conditions to appear as if they exist the way they look to us. So when you think about causality, when you say that there are causes and conditions and then their effects, we think as if there is something out there concretely existing as causes and conditions and their effects. And so in the what is cause, what arises through causes and conditions, thinking or perceiving them to have some kind of real existence out there from their own side, is this kind of view or perception is a distorted perception. And so that is what the Buddha has said to be ignorance. So looking to the verse quoted earlier, and the 400 verses of Aryadeva says that if things have some kind of intrinsic existence, then what is the need for the Buddha to teach emptiness? So if things have some kind of intrinsic independent existence, then there's no point in saying that things are empty of such an independent existence. So if things were to have some intrinsic existence, then saying that things are empty of intrinsic existence and holding such a view would be a distortion. So Aryadeva is saying that if things have some kind of independent existence, then there is no point in talking about emptiness and seeing empty nature of things. And what is seen through conception is a bondage, it is said. So this kind of bondage, the conception, is some kind of distorted perception, distorted conception. What that means is clinging to the independent nature of things as they appear to us. So we kind of have this strong clinging and that things exist in the way they appear to us, which is to say that they appear to us as if they have some kind of concrete, independent existence. So when you look at things as having that kind of, or perceiving things to have that kind of existence, then that conception is distortion. So that is a bondage. How does it bind us? So when you see, for example, something which is attractive, you have this perception or conception that attractiveness is independently existing from the side of the object. There's some kind of absolute independently existing attractiveness in the object. And it's that kind of attraction or the clinging. And similarly, with anger, this happens. So because of these two, we can see all kinds of problems arising from the problems in the family up to the global level, or from problems in the global level. And we think of victory for oneself and defeat for others. Of course, nobody is thinking about it, some kind of eternal happiness, but just some kind of temporary satisfaction and happiness. And because of short-sightedness, we cause ourselves more problems. When the different big countries lay down their policies, with a broad view and understanding the reality as it is, precisely, correctly, then even the policies are based on such short-sighted views of some long short-term goals without having that broad perspective of things. And because of greed, whatever we do, we are not able to see the long-term disadvantage or the shortcomings of their effects. So what is seen through conception is bondage, and that is seized or stopped by understanding the suchness or reality. So our mind, a conceptual mind or thought, perceives as if things have some kind of independent existence. So there is such a way of looking at things, and because of that, the attachment and anger are produced. So therefore, the means to stop such a conceptual thought is to understand that things do not exist in the way they perceived to be by this kind of conception. And therefore you can reduce this kind of attachment or clinging to such an independent way of existence of things. And therefore the 400 verses of Aryadeva says, if things have independent existence, then what is the need to see emptiness? And the conceptual clinging is bondage. And that is overcome by the seeing suchness. So what we are trying to negate here is not the things that exist, such as forms, the material, the matter, sound, smell, and so forth. But what we are negating here is that of true existence of things, that kind of an independent existence. So if you deny the existence of matter and sound and so forth, then it goes against our own experience, because we can see these things, hear the sounds and so forth. So if we go against it, is going against our own actual experience. So although the form and sound and so forth do exist, the way they exist is merely by way of designation, merely in name. They do not have any kind of objective existence from their own side. And therefore the purpose of emptiness is to stop that kind of clinging. Islam is looking for some lines. So he's asking the Geshe-las on his right side. Nobody is able to respond. So the form and so forth, the form and south and so forth are not what we are negating, it, the quotation says. But what we are negating is, so the cognition of form and sound and so forth are not what is denied or rejected. But what we are trying to overcome is that of the conceptual thought or mind, conceptions which cling at some kind of independent existence of things. So how do we overcome this kind of conception which clings to some independent existence or true existence of things? Aryadeva moves on to say that just as the bodily sensation pervades the whole body, all of our sensory faculties, likewise all our afflictive thoughts and emotions or delusions or destructive emotions are pervaded by or permeated by the clinging or the perception of true existence. So here he uses the analogy of the bodily sensation pervading all the rest of the sensory faculties. So likewise, the other destructive emotions such as attachment and anger, of course, they do not permeate. They don't permeate all kinds of destructive emotions, but ignorance, ignorance of true reality pervades or permeates all kinds of destructive emotions. So what is this ignorance? How do we destroy it? The next Ayadeva goes on to say, if you see that of interdependent nature of things, then this kind of ignorance will not arise. So, for example, if we perceive oneself to have some kind of a permanent, unitary, autonomous existence, which is a gross form of grasping at self of a person. So similarly, there are other gross forms of clinging or to some kind of a soul or independent existent, permanently existent of a person. So by realizing the opposite of those gross forms of self identity of things, we will not be able to overcome the very subtle or the subtlest form of clinging to true existence. And therefore, if you are able to see the subtle selflessness, the subtlest selflessness, then you'll be able to overcome the rest of the clinging on to some kind of a self-identity of a person. And therefore, I never says that if you see that of dependently arisen nature of things, then the ignorance will not arise. So how is it that this can happen? In the fundamental wisdom of Nagarjuna, it says, what is dependently arisen is said to be empty. And and what is dependently designated, that it's itself said to be the middle way. And so what Nagarjuna is saying, that if things are dependent on other factors, and therefore they do not have any self-existence. So whatever is dependently arisen is declared to be empty. So of course, when we talk about emptiness, do not get the idea that all the different philosophical systems within Buddhism assert this view of emptiness. Whereas on the other hand, we have the theistic religions, which believe in the creation of God. And so when they submit themselves to God and accordingly tackle the destructive emotions. And in Buddhism, we talk about those of impermanence, suffering, empty nature, and selflessness. But here, what we are talking about is the very subtle emptiness. So the meaning of emptiness is the freedom from a state which is free from the two extremes of nihilism and eternalism. So that reality of dependently arisen phenomena is said to be empty. So when we say things arise or come about in dependence on others, it shows that they do not have independent arising. So because they are dependently arisen, it shows that they do exist. So because things are dependent, we can say that they do exist and they have influence or effect on us. We are not talking about something like a horn of a rabbit, which is not existent. So when we say things are empty, we are not talking about nihilism or denying any existence of things. But we do still assert that things exist. So the way they exist is not from in their own right, like an independent existence, but dependently arising or originated. But what happens to us is things appear or look to us as if they have some kind of independent existence. And accordingly, we also cling to such an independent way of existing things. And because of that clinging, we cause all kinds of problems. And therefore, if you can think about the importance or significance of the understanding of emptiness, and in the second text that we are going to touch, Tsongkhapas says that the main, the primary way how the Buddha helps us is by giving teachings. And mainly here it is the teaching on dependent nature of things. Of all the deeds, your speech is supreme, it says. Within that too, it is that very speech. So with regard to our attachment, and greed and so forth, being negative, destructive emotions, even the Christians, even Christianity teaches this. And in the non-Buddhist traditions of classical and Indian non-Buddhist traditions also, they acknowledge these destructive emotions. But what Buddhism teaches is that all these other destructive emotions arise because of some kind of clinging to some self-identity, independently existing self-identity. Whereas other traditions, other religious traditions do assert some kind of a soul, and on the basis of that, they go about with their practices. So the difference between the demarcation between Buddhist and non-Buddhist traditions is that of rejecting the existence of some kind of self-independently existing person or not. So Buddhism rejects self-independently existing self, whereas others do assert some soul or Atman theory. Of course, when it comes to practicing compassion, in the Mahayana tradition, what is unique about it is that of cultivating bodhicitta for the benefit of all sentient beings. But mere practice or cultivation of love and compassion, kindness, and all these are common to other religious traditions as well. If we look at our situation or the birds and so forth, just after the hatching of the eggs, the baby birds cannot fly out of their nest. So this affection is also a biological factor. It's not about, doesn't necessarily have to do with religion. All humans have this. The mothers have their affection, love towards their children. So the baby, of course, doesn't know who the person is. It doesn't have any idea of a mother or anything like that. But then, because of the mother's care of it, the baby is totally relying on the mother. And so we can see this even in the animals, like cats and dogs and so forth. The mother has so much affection to its baby, and the baby also reciprocates the same, or reacts the same way. So this kind of love do not arise in the animals. Does not arise in the animals because of some kind of religious idea. So the cultivation of compassion and by seeing the suffering nature of things is very much emphasized in Buddhism. So otherwise, this is something common. Whereas what Buddhism teaches is that all our troubles come from our destructive emotions, and destructive emotions are seen as something that are to be put an end to. And therefore, we have the understanding or the teaching on nirvana or enlightenment. So without understanding selflessness, without understanding that there is a possibility for attaining nirvana or enlightenment by overcoming our destructive emotions and their imprints, then we can see that there is this possibility of attaining them. And therefore, we'll think of or put effort in overcoming the destructive emotions that are within us, which bind us in samsara. So when I was in Lhasa, in Nobulenka, we had a parrot in Nobulenka, and it can even recite Om Mani Padme Hum, this 6-syllable mantra. So otherwise, if you don't understand what that enlightenment is and how to attain that, so with regard to enlightenment, if you can understand that we have that kind of a nature or Buddha nature for attaining it, and when we overcome all the defilements that are within our mind stream, that we can attain it. So all sentient beings have Buddha nature, and we are all same in terms of not wanting suffering, but wanting happiness. So if we can use our intelligence and see this fact in other animals, just as you don't want suffering, just as you have Buddha nature, you can also cultivate or just wish for others to be to attain thereof enlightenment, and you will also think of being able to do so for others. So of course, when I talk about emptiness, I'm not trying to boast about it, but it's not like a showing off. But since my childhood, I've been thinking about emptiness. When I do some tantric practice, we have to meditate on emptiness, and I also think or reflect on bodhicitta. So over many years, since many years have passed, over those many years, I've had some kind of experience. But what I'm stuck with is that of the single-pointed concentration, or shamatha experience. So I can say that I have some kind of conviction of how the unfailing nature of causality, So His Holiness just recited certain verses from Tsongkhapas' text in praise of Tibetan origination, verse number 31, 32, and 33. So if you understand how things are devoid of any independent nature of things, then you can understand the nature of four noble truths, and accordingly you'll have trust and respect for the teacher who has taught this. So by understanding how we can actually bring about the Dharma jewel within ourselves, by understanding those of the noble truth of cessation and the noble truth of path. And so Holiness just recited how the Lama Tsongkhapa has found the Buddha to be really amazing and wonderful in all this. By understanding the teaching of the Buddha with respect to the dependent nature of things, and on the basis of that, how the Four Noble Truths are taught and so forth. So I could just tell you a story. There was it happened in Kham, region of Tibet. And so there was an abbot of a monastery, and some people from other village came to see the abbot, and whereas the abbot had gone to another place to give some teaching. And then these visitors saw the attendant of the abbot asking them to have an audience, and the attendant said the abbot went to actually frighten the old men and women in the village. So if there is no need for understanding the dharma properly, then of course we can say do not commit evil, and because you'll go into hell and so forth. So there are people who are skeptical about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And also, there are people who hold on to some kind of orthodox view about cosmology, as we said yesterday, about the mandala and so forth. But we have to be able to grasp the essence of the teaching. The essence of Dharma is not about building monasteries and performing some kind of a ritual without really understanding them. But we have to understand that Dharma is about applying the teaching within ourselves to transform from within. So, in order to understand Buddha Dharma very well, you have to reflect on the teaching on emptiness. So if you do that, you'll find that you cannot deny it. And so you'll slowly gain conviction in the teaching of emptiness. And then you can apply it in your practice. In the Chonang, there is a verse in the So what this verse is saying is that all things that appear to us are just like illusion, and therefore if you see that, then you will not have clinging or grasping to these. So just as this external world can appear like an illusion, likewise our mind also, although there are many different types of mind, and we can learn about all kinds of the definitions, nature, identity, divisions, and so forth. But they are all like illusion, and you can see the clear or luminous nature of the mind. So whether you look in the outside world, external world, or the world within, this. You cannot point to one thing as being this or that. So when you understand this, then you have the experience of bliss, the great bliss experience. In other words, if you can see that nothing exists independently, whereas the grasping at true existence see as if things have some kind of independent existence. And so because of that, we give rise to attachment, anger, and all these destructive emotions. Whereas if you see that the things do not have any kind of independent existence, you will be able to reduce this clinging and anger and so forth, and because of that you'll be rather have the experience of great bliss within yourself. So with regard to this verse from the Chonang text, you don't have to go through complications of talking about the intrinsic emptiness or extrinsic emptiness or anything like that, but the general meaning, as I have explained. And therefore, the understanding of emptiness, view of emptiness, is something which is very important in the beginning to understand, to get some kind of understanding of the teaching of the Buddha. Because when we talk about the two truths, we establish the reality of things on the ground level. Chuchon Lama Rinpoche says, the two truths which are on the ground level, and then there are those of the two aspects of the path which we proceed on, and then so when you are able to experience emptiness through in a meditative way, then it is said that you enter into the path of preparation. And then as you go along the path higher and higher, you are able to finally overcome all destructive emotions within oneself. That is when you reach enlightenment, nirvana. And then further, if you are also able to overcome even the imprints of the destructive emotions, in other words, cognitive obscuration, then you become an all-knowing one, a Buddha. And therefore, the state of Buddhahood is such that where you see all objects of knowledge, everything as they are, precisely. So in order to reach that goal, it is important to understand the two truths on the ground level. For that, it is important, therefore it is important to understand emptiness, and to progress on the path also, it is important to have the understanding or insight into emptiness. And then you reach finally that of the omniscient state of Buddhahood, in which you are absorbed totally in that of concentration, never wavering from it. So yesterday we were on verse number 10, one of the Geshe said. So verse number 9 has just read. So this verse is shows the same meaning as another verse which comes from the King of Concentration Sutra. Whatever arises in dependence on conditions is unborn. So the text, this sutra says it lacks the essence of birth. So what these two lines show is that things do arise through causes and conditions, but they are, by saying that they are unborn, what it's saying is that they are unborn because they are devoid of any kind of essential reality of birth. On a conventional level, we talk about the nature of such and such person, and we say, oh, he cannot be changed because it's his nature. But here, when we talk about this unborn nature, what we are saying is that things are devoid of any independent or intrinsic existence, because intrinsic existence and dependence oppose each other. In the next verse, verse number 10, without being known, it's not an object of knowledge. Without that, without a consciousness, so without an agent being there which knows things, you cannot talk about there being objects that are known. So when you say knowing something, we have what is known, what is learned, and then the act or the learning, knowing. So the action, the agent, and the object, all three are interrelated. And the next line says, without that, there is no consciousness as well. The Chittamata's philosophical school says that there's no external existence, no externality of things, but then consciousness or cognition does exist. So they deny the external existence of external things, whereas they say that all these things that appeared external to us are because of some kind of imprint or seed becoming manifest that are on our mind. So, in one of the Maitreya's texts, it is said that things do not have perfect nature, but there is this rarefying conception. And so when this text says there is this existence of refined consciousness or cognition, Vasubandhu goes on to refer to that as saying there is this kind of intrinsic existence of conception. And therefore the known possess no intrinsic reality, you have said. Verse number 11. The characteristic is different from the characterized. So if they have some kind of intrinsically existing, if the characteristics or the definition and what is defined do have some kind of they are independently different from each other, then there would be logical fallacies, as it is said in Fundamental Wisdom of Nagarjuna as well. The characterized would exist without the characteristic. You have clearly stated also that neither exists if they are conceived of as non-different. Verse number 12, devoid of characteristic and the characterized, and free from the utterances of words, with your eyes of perfect gnosis you bring tranquility to the beings. So, if you think that things exist merely in name, then there may be some danger of thinking that we can give any name to anything. If you say, people may bring up this kind of qualm that if things are merely nominal, then there would be the logical fallacy that we can have anything if we can call them certain names. But that is not right. Of course, when we say things are merely nominal, we are not denying the existence of things themselves as such. But what we are denying is the independent existence of the things, which are merely designated. So it is not the case that we can give any name to anything and that we can use any name and that thing, whatever we are trying to refer that name to, can exist. But although things are merely nominal and they do not have any self-independent existence, we can still talk about causality. They are not mere conceptually mere fictions of our mind. Verse number 13, an existent thing does not exist. So if things have some kind of essential existence from their own side, then they cannot, we cannot talk about their arising or giving rise to effects and so forth. And the first two lines of verse number 13 shows that of a reasoning known as refutation or rejection of the existent and non-existent. In other words, analyzing that of the product having existence. And then the third line in this verse, neither from itself nor from another. So neither from itself is refutation of the Sankhya, the assertion or of Sankhya school, which say that things have some essence in them from which things arise. Therefore, they assert these things arising from the self. Whereas with regard to non-arisal from another, this is a refutation of other schools within Buddhism, which say that there is some kind of intrinsically existing other, and from an intrinsically existing other seed or cause, the intrinsically arising effects can arise. So from within that context, then whatever they assert, they say self and others, they of course, when rejecting arising from another, this is not a rejection of things, literally, or in the conventional sense, things arising from another or other factors. But in the ultimate analysis, there's no arising from another. So these next two lines in the verse number 13 is the rejection of what is known as arising or birth. It's called the reasoning of Tetralema. Verse number 14. It's logical for an existence to endure. Not so for such a thing to disintegrate. Since it's logical for a non-existent not to endure, it cannot come to disintegrate. So these are talking about if things have some kind of existence, independent or existence, then you cannot have any cause or condition that can make it not endure, and so forth. And verse number 15. First of all, it's illogical for an effect to emerge from a cause that is itself destructed. So the analysis that is being done here in verse number 15 is also a similar analysis is found in Kamala Shila's Madhyamaka, the lamp of Madhyamaka. So although there is a perception or appearance of things arising from its cause and conditions, but they are like a dream. So verse number 13 shows that. And then verse number 16. Oh, verse number 17 also. Verse number 17. In verse number 17, there is this in the translation the word, the term world. So with regard to this term, which is in Tibetan says do, which means to go, or he's always just thinking, trying to remember some line or from Maitreya's Uttara Tantra. So regarding this, so it means doa means to migrate or to go somewhere. So here this do is translated as world. Whereas the term do here can refer to the object of knowledge, which means that it can become or as become an object of one's cognition. So verse number 18 shows that the samsaric experience is like a dream. And verse number 19 and 20. So verse number 20 shows what I explained earlier. What is dependently, what comes about through dependence is said to be empty, and that it is dependently designated, and therefore it is the middle way. So it shows that the Buddha has stated that, or said that things are merely dependently arisen, and therefore they do not have any independent existence, and therefore you, the peerless, proclaimed this in your lion's roar. And verse number 21. Since you teach the ambrosia of emptiness, to help abandon all conceptualizations, he who clings to this, that is emptiness, this you have strongly condemned. So there have been people in Tibet also who have held that emptiness is to be regarded as having some independent reality. So with regard to what we are negating when we use the term ultimate, there are various ways of understanding it. On the one hand, we can use this in terms of the object of negation when we establish emptiness. So things do not have any ultimate existence, means you are negating that kind of existence. So it becomes the object of negation. If there were in the fundamental wisdom, it says if there is a slight slight way of things existing without being empty, then there would also be an empty nature of things as well. And so if you hold emptiness to have some kind of intrinsic or independent existence, then that is said to be a view which is difficult to do away with, or so in verse number 22 shows that in the Maitreya's Abhisamaya Alamkara, the ornament of clear realization, there is a verse. There is nothing to be dispelled or discarded, and there's nothing which can be established. Seeing the perfect nature as being the perfect nature itself, one can liberate oneself. So what this means is that when we negate object of negation, when we say things do not have any intrinsic existence, when we negate intrinsic existence on things, in other words, we are not trying to negate something which is already there and which we can kind of reject through logical analysis, and nor the emptiness itself is something which is established, which is not there, but we logically establish it on objects. And so object of knowledge is not something which is kind of eliminated from the objects, and emptiness is not something which is newly sort of established on objects, but it is the true nature of things themselves. And therefore, when you see this, you are able to overcome the distorted view of which holds to which kind of clings to some kind of intrinsic existence, and therefore this kind of distorted overcoming this kind of distorted view through the understanding or insight into emptiness, one is able to reach enlightenment. And so similarly, there is in the sutra, emptiness is the same, what is already there as the quality of things. And whether the Buddhas come into the world or not, it doesn't matter. The reality of things, which is that emptiness, will remain to be the reality of things. His Holiness somehow detected that there's one line missing, and therefore he's reading from the beginning. He started reading from the beginning of the text. So we are on verse number 25. So this verse shows that in order to reach, we have to understand or gain the insight into emptiness in order to attain nirvana. So this finished this text by Nagarjuna. So we only have the reading transmission of this. So it is done. Now move on to the next text. In praise of dependent origination. So he who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him a knower and the teacher unexcelled. So one who sees the nature of dependent origination makes him an unexcelled knower, and one is able to teach that, just as he has seen it, makes him the unexcelled teacher. So verse number 2, whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So the difference between samsara, the unenlightened existence, and nirvana, or liberation, is made on the basis of whether you see that of the nature of dependent origination or not. So ignorance cannot be overcome merely through recitation of mantras or prayers and so forth, but by understanding the dependent nature of things. And so you have to put effort in studying them and then reflecting on the meaning and then finally applying this in your understanding in meditation. And through that, gradually, eventually you'll be able to uproot ignorance. So the final reason, the ultimate reason to establish that there is the possibility of nirvana and enlightenment or Buddhahood or omniscient nature is the reasoning of dependent origination. So when you come to this very subtle level of understanding this, then you have to understand that of emptiness in order to reach enlightenment. Of course, there may be other reasons, but the ultimate reason is this one. So it says this verse number 4, this being so, who will find, O Savior, a more wonderful way to praise you than to praise you for having taught this origination through dependence. So all these phenomena around us have come about through causes and conditions. So this is said to be a great wisdom that Tsongkhapas is saying, the great wisdom that the Buddha has shared with us. Whatever, verse number 5, whatsoever depends on conditions, that is devoid of intrinsic existence. What excellent instruction can be there more amazing than this proclamation. In verse number 6, so childish people hold on to the view that things have some kind of intrinsic existence because they arise through causes and conditions. And so it says, by grasping at it, the childish strengthen bondage to extreme views. So His Holiness is just trying to correct the Tibetan text, which refers to this extreme view. So there's a need for adding a grammatical particle there. Rather than saying tazin, it should be tarzin with a ra. For the wise, this very fact is the doorway to cut free from the net of elaborations. So with regard to elaboration, the term elaboration, there are many different kinds of elaborations, such as conceptual elaboration or conceptual constructions, and also that of the elaboration or verification of intrinsic existence. Since this teaching is not seen elsewhere, you alone are the teacher. Like calling a fox a lion. For a Tirthika, it would be a word of flattery. So the Buddha is someone who has given the teaching about reality of things as they are, and in order to liberate sentient beings from the swamp of samsara. And then verse number 8, wondrous teacher, wondrous refuge. So the term Amaho shows amazement. So it says the teacher, the Buddha, is an unexcelled teacher, or a peerless one, because he shows the true antidote to the clinging to some true existence of things. And true speaker, as we say, do not rely on the person but this teaching. So this reality or the suchness of the independent nature of things is the best kind of teaching, and therefore the Buddha is the wondrous teacher. And so understanding the nature of interdependent nature of things, you try to avoid the 10 negative actions, thereby leading oneself to higher rebirths. And so thinking about the interdependent nature of things in terms of causality and thinking about will lead you to have higher rebirth because of avoiding those of the 10 non-virtuous actions and practicing the 10 virtuous actions, and understanding the interdependent nature of things in terms of how things are merely nominal existent. You overcome all destructive emotions within oneself and reach that of nirvana. And therefore, the teacher who has shown this is a wondrous savior. I pay homage to that teacher who taught well dependent origination. So, dependent origination is the reason that is used to come to the conclusion that things are empty of intrinsic existence. So whereas for ordinary people, the very reason of dependent origination intensifies or that they're clinging to some kind of independent existence. Even if someone accepts that of causality, law of causality, but then if they still cling to some kind of independent existence of those causality, so So we're on verse number 11. Verse number 12. Whereas when one sees the opposite, since there can be no function in emptiness, nor emptiness in what has functions, one falls into the dreadful abyss you maintain. So someone who says that things are empty, and therefore all the law of causality are there merely as like illusion, like merely as false. Then if you think like that, then the understanding of emptiness leads you to fall into the abyss of nihilism. Therefore, in your teaching, seeing dependent origination is hailed. So verse number 14. So if things were to have some kind of intrinsic independent existence, then they would not be dependent on anything. It says it is the non-contingent is like a sky flower, which shows something non-existent. And therefore, hence, there is nothing that is not dependent. So if something can have some kind of self-sufficient existence, existence independently, then it should not depend on other factors. So if things depend on other factors for their existence, then it shows that they cannot be independent. And therefore, it says if things exist through their essence, their dependence on causes and conditions for their existence is not a contradiction. And therefore, since no phenomena exist other than origination through dependence, because things are dependent on causes and conditions, it says other than origination through dependence, there is nothing. No phenomena exist other than being devoid of intrinsic existence, you are taught. And then verse number 16, because intrinsic nature cannot be negated. If phenomena possess some intrinsic nature, nirvana would not be possible and elaborations could not be ceased. This is because you cannot overcome the destructive emotions, by doing which we reach that of nirvana. Therefore, who could challenge you? You who proclaim with lion's roar in the assembly of learned ones repeatedly that everything is utterly free of intrinsic nature. Emptiness doesn't mean things are devoid of any function, but that things are like illusion. That there is no intrinsic existence at all, and that all functions as this arising in dependence on that, what need is there to say that these two converge without conflict? So when we talk about independent arising, the dependence here does not exclude that of the reality of emptiness, whereas the origination doesn't negate that of the conventional existence of things. In other words, that things do function in the conventional level. So the different reasonings that we can use to establish emptiness, such as the diamond splinter reasoning and so forth, will not give us the insight into, although they can give us insight into emptiness, they not so much can give us the insight into the conventional reality of things. Whereas the reasoning of dependent arising or dependent origination can give us both insights into emptiness as well as the conventional nature of things. Verse number 20. Oh, verse number 19, I'm sorry. Verse number 20. Verse number 21. So, in the commentary to Awakening Mind, Nagarjuna says that there's what more wondrous or wonderful teaching than this? What more amazing or marvelous teaching than this can be? So these teachings on bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, and teaching on emptiness are really marvelous. Of course, if you really give thought to them, they're really marvelous. And we, of course, need the preliminary practices that lead to these experiences. Verse number 22, being enslaved by ignorance, those who fiercely oppose you what is so astonishing about their being unable to bear the sound of no intrinsic existence. So for those who do not accept dependent origination, they have their own way of understanding things according to their own philosophical traditions. So there's verse number 23 says, but having accepted the dependent origination, the precious treasure of your speech, then not tolerating the roar of emptiness, this I find amazing indeed. So verse number 24, if you use this reasoning of dependent origination to try to prove that things have intrinsic existence, then the primary reason to prove that things do not have any intrinsic existence is rather being rejected. Verse number 26, intrinsic nature, uncreated and uncontingent, dependent origination, contingent and created. How can these two converge upon a single basis without contradiction? Verse number 27, therefore, whatever originates dependently, though primordially free of intrinsic existence, appears as it is, as if it does possess intrinsic existence. So you taught all this is to be illusion-like. Next verse. Through this very fact, I understand well the statement that to what you have taught, those opponents who challenge you cannot find faults that accord with reason. So there are those who for whom, if it is said that things have no intrinsic existence, then they would rather perceive that to mean that things do not have any existence at all. And therefore, for the sake of them, the Buddha has taught what are known as the three natures, according to, as explained according to the Chittamatra philosophy. The three natures being constructed nature, dependent nature, and the consummate or perfect nature. In the 24th chapter of Fundamental Wisdom, Nagarjuna says, first of all, 24th 24th chapter of Nagarjunas Fundamental Wisdom, he says, first of all, he sets up the position of the Buddhist essentialists, and he says, then when he answers them, he says that they have not understood the purpose of the teaching of emptiness. They have not understood the so he goes on to explain the purpose of teaching on emptiness and the nature of emptiness and the meaning of emptiness. And therefore, he gives these two verses which say that whatever is dependent, whatever is dependently arisen, is said to be declared to be empty, and that's being dependent designation it itself, that of empty, the middle way. There is nothing which is not dependent, and therefore there is nothing which is not empty. So these two verses from the 24th chapter are the essence, capture the essence of the whole of the fundamental wisdom by Nagarjuna. So if you are interested, you can memorize these two verses. And so verse number 28 says, through that very fact I understand well the statement that to what you have taught, those opponents who challenge you cannot find faults that accord with reason. Why is this so? Because by declaring these chances of deification and denigration towards things seen and unseen are made remote. So through this very path of dependent origination, the rationale for your speech being peerless, convictions arise in me also that your other words are valid too. So what this shows is that the teaching of the Buddha on dependent origination, because of this, your teaching becomes something which is non-deceptive. You who speak excellently by seeing as it is, for those who train in your footsteps, all degenerations will become remote, for the root of all faults will be undone. But those who turn away from your teaching, though they may struggle with hardship for a long time, faults increase ever more as if being called forth, for they make firm the view of selflessness. When the wise comprehend the differences between these two, why would they not at that point revere you from the depths of their being, let alone your numerous teaching? So these, from this verse down, the Tsongkhapas is actually referring to his own experience. Let alone your numerous teaching, even in the meaning of small part, those who find ascertainment in a cursory way, this brings supreme bliss to them as well. Alas, my mind was defeated by ignorance, and so forth. So the teachings on impermanence and so forth are to lead us to the understanding of emptiness. And whereas the teaching on emptiness is the means by which we would be able to overcome those of destructive emotions completely, uproot them. So the teachings on gross level of selflessness are the ones which make us approach those of the emptiness and or the final reality of things. And teaching on emptiness itself is the one which actually bring us to that goal. Verse number 45 and 46. 44 and 45. 46. This excellent system, most marvelous, some individuals who are not so learned have entangled it in utter confusion, just like the tangled Belvazar grass. So the Belvazar grass is something which always grow entangled with each other. Verse number 47, seeing this situation, I strove with a multitude of efforts to follow after the learned ones and sought your intention again and again. So even within the teaching of the Buddha, there are those teachings such as the Samdhinimochana Sutra and also Langaravatara Sutra, where the Buddha teaches that of the non-existence of external phenomena. And therefore, the great masters like Asanga and his brother Vasubandhu and also Dignaka and Dharmakirti and so forth, they also accordingly explain the teaching of the Buddha from the point of view of the mind-only school, which reject externality of things. And also Master Kamalashila says that interprets that the teachings in the Panchaparamita Sutras reject that of ultimate existence of things. So he uses this qualification of ultimate when interpreting the teachings, where it says things do not have any intrinsic existence. And verse 47, it says, to follow after the learned ones and sought, seeing this as... So... actually the line is on verse number 48. At such times I studied the numerous works of both our own, which means the middle way, and our school, other schools, means my mind became tormented ever more constantly by the network of doubts. And the night lily grove of Nagarjuna's treatise, Nagarjuna, whom you prophesied, would unravel your unexalted vehicle as it is, shunning extremes of existence and non-existence. Illuminated by the garland of white lights of Chandra, well-uttered insights, who glides freely across the scripture's space. So here these verses use metaphors of space and so forth. Who dispels the darkness of extremist hearts and outshines the constellations of false speakers. When through my teacher's kindness I saw this, my mind found at rest at last. Of all your deeds, your speech is supreme. Within that too, it is this very speech. So the wise should remember the Buddha through this teaching of dependent origination. So, as I explained earlier, we have the three objects of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, because of the Buddhism being very prevalent in Tibet, in terms of the Tantra. Therefore, we also have in our refuge verse, I take refuge in the Lama. Of course, the Lama can be an ordinary person who is on the Arya path, or who is a Buddha, and even a person who may be just an ordinary person. But in order for the blessings of the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, to enter you, you have to have someone who introduces you to the Dharma, who has the experience of it. So, of course, the time of the Buddha, people saw the Buddha himself. And then, of course, we cannot see the Buddha in our times, but then even with regards to a teacher who has reached the Arya path of seeing and beyond, maybe it's very rare to find. In the past, there was a story that in Tashikil Monastery in Labrang, in Amdo, there was a teacher who had reached the path of preparation, which is the second path within the Bodhisattva path system. Otherwise, amongst the thousands of monks and scholars in our monastic institutions, perhaps it's very rare for us to find. So, of course, based on some tantric practice of visualizations and using the internal energies of the subtle drops and wind energy and so forth, there are people who are able to bring about the experience or insight into emptiness and so forth. But otherwise, we have, it's very rare to find. So, with regard to a Lama, there's someone who has experience after following the teaching himself. So within the Lama, you can have those of the Lamas who give you vows, pratimoksha vows, the individual liberation vows, of monastic vows and lay people's vows. And then there are those of the Bodhisattva vows, and then the Bodhisattva vows and the Lamas who can give tantric vows. And therefore, you have the line, I take refuge in the Lama. But of course, the best qualified Lamas would be those who have reached enlightenment, or those who are on a high level of realization in the path. Whereas for us ordinary beings, in our view, we can only even have Lamas who can help us according to our own understanding. Of course, when you are able to develop further on the path, there will be a time when you can actually receive teachings from Buddhas and Bodhisattvas directly. But until that time comes to us, we have to rely on our gurus. A Lama who shows up in the form of an ordinary person is really kind to us. As it is said in the Guru Puja, the countless Buddhas who have appeared have not been able to tame us, and so forth. And I met once one German lady who visited Bhutan, and she visited some monasteries and saw that the Buddha was somewhere displayed below arranged on the altar. Buddha was rather arranged somewhere below the Lamas, and there was so much emphasis on considering the Lamas higher than the Buddha, which she didn't like, she said to me. So verse number 55, first two lines. So having the verse number 54 and 55 shows that you have to understand what the teaching of the Buddha is all about. So he's always correcting the Tibetan text that is published. When it comes to the line of verse number 57, line number 2, it should be the word here should be the word for analyzing. So Nagarjuna's text shows us the dependent origination nature of things. This is the main content. And Tsongkhapa follows this. And Tsongkhapa himself has said in his text that most of the praises that the Nagarjuna has written to the Buddha are use the teaching of dependent origination as the leverage for praising the Buddha. So most of Nagarjuna's praise to Buddha are from the point of view of teaching dependent origination. So we should also follow the same trend, and also to introduce Buddhism, it should be done on the basis of teaching on dependent origination. So if you wish to become a follower of the Buddha using reasoning, based on reasoning, then you have to understand this dependent origination of things. So you have to know the logical procedures in order to prove that things are empty of intrinsic existence. And therefore, Master Chandarakshita uses logic a lot in his Madhyamaka text. So there has evolved this tradition which is known as Unse Singe Jingmen, which is to literally it means like the two necks of the yoked necks of the two lines or something like that. So what this means is that the Madhyamaka master like Chandarakshita have used, of course, when trying to prove the Madhyamaka view or explain the Madhyamaka view, they used logic, following the tradition of Dignaka and Dharmakirti and so forth as well. And so therefore we have to be able to make a distinction between the general presentation of the Dharma and the presentation of Dharma for specific disciples. One Tibetan master named Drugu Sungrapa has made this distinction. So he lived, lived in the when I was little, I've heard about him. So he was a Gelokpa master, but then he also followed that of the Nyingma tradition as well. So he has found full conviction in the teaching of the Lama Tsongkhapa, as well as the teachings of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. So he has made this distinction between the general presentation of the Dharma and then the specific teachings for specific disciples. So he was, the Drugu Sungrapa lived during the time of the 13th Dalai Lama. And then similarly, the Drupten Vinyima's student, Drugu Tsulu, he was a Nyingma follower of Nyingma tradition. But then he also studied the Gelug texts, like his master, the Drupten Nyima. So he also understood the teaching of the tradition which comes from the tradition of Lama Tsongkhapa very well, perfectly. So with regard to myself, I have received teachings on Nyingtik, the heart essence teaching of the Nyingmapa, and I read the treasury of reality of phenomena, Chuingzi. Of course, there are certain texts like that which are meant for really highly developed practitioners. So having the basic understanding of the general presentation of the Dharma, then when you go into those higher teachings which are meant for specific disciples, they can make better sense for us. And all the teachings of the traditions of the different traditions of Tibetan Buddhism have the same goal. We cannot make any kind of discrimination, saying I'm Gelugpa or I'm Nyingmapa and so forth. So all of these converge to the same point, as Panchen Lobsang Chögyен has said. So with regard to meditation again, in the the Mahamudra and Dzogchen high-level practices, then they focus only on the single-pointed concentration. And this is the same in the Geluk system as well. When you reach the experience of great bliss and then try to develop that insight into emptiness, you can't do analytical meditation, but you have to do focused meditation, single-pointed concentration. Therefore, it is important for the followers of different traditions to understand the overall structure of the other traditions as well, not just pick up some point and try to refute them. So Lama Tsongkhapa has said that one should not just stay contented with just a partial understanding of the teaching of the Buddha, but one has to actually develop the complete understanding of the teaching, the overall structure of the teaching. One should not be contented with partial understanding and just a rough understanding, but you have to engage or learn the entire teaching of the Buddha. And so, of course, this tradition is there in all the different Buddhist traditions of Tibet, Sakya, Nyingma, Gelug, Kagyu, even Burmos. But then there are some people who don't, without understanding the overall structure of each of these different traditions, try to discriminate between among these different teachings, saying that the such and such tradition did not teach saying that one's own tradition is the most profound one and not the others. So, with regard to myself, I practice all these different traditions. So I've received teachings of Dzogchen, all the different categories within the Dzogchen, such as the Semde, Longde, Mengade, and so forth. Of course, I can say, although I do not have a real experience of all these teachings within these categories, but I have understanding through reasoning. To the point that I have the conviction about the truth of these teachings. I have no doubt about it. So I've also received teachings on Lamde, the Sakya from the Sakya in the Sakya tradition, and all these different traditions converge to the same point. And I also admire all the great masters of all these different traditions who have made such great contributions to the Buddha Dharma. So, of course, in general, we have to respect all the different religious traditions of the world, as I said before, and particularly the different traditions of Buddhism of Tibet. Then you can have so without understanding the teaching, some people say that if you are a Nyingma or Gelugpa, just touching some Nyingma teaching would have a negative influence on you, or if someone were a Nyingma practitioner, then they said that, touching Gelug text would have a negative influence on us. This is not true. This is totally out of ignorance that people are saying such things. So you have to make sure to have the overall picture or the structure of Buddhism, and be able to take the whole teaching comprehensively. So next we'll have the question and answers. So to give a strange answer to this question, it's just poking your nose into something that doesn't concern you. So basically, so the Buddha nature that are within sentient beings, is it external negative phenomena or internal negative phenomena? And is this Buddha nature a Buddha as such or not? So with regard to Buddha nature, according to Abhisamaya Alamkara by Maitreya, and what Indian master Abhayakara's commentary on it, it is said that the Buddha nature is only that of the emptiness of the mind of sentient beings. So from that point of view, then it is an external negative, or what is known as non-implicative negation. It's like saying, when we say this hall is empty of elephants, it's devoid of emptiness, so that lack of elephant doesn't show anything else but mere absence. But on the other hand, if you say, though the elephant is not here, then what that implies is that there is something else. Although the elephant is not there, there is something else. So when we perceive things, there are these different ways of perceiving. On the one hand, you perceive the thing by perceive the object or the phenomena by negating something on it. So when you meditate on emptiness, when you are totally absorbed in emptiness, you are not really thinking this is emptiness, but so when you are able to see emptiness, then even the object on which you establish emptiness doesn't appear to your mind. So as I said yesterday, there is this Buddha nature which is explained in terms of a seed, which seed for the three Buddha bodies. So that is what we can call a positive phenomena. So there are different ways of interpreting Buddha nature. Within the context of the Sutrayana, there are these two different ways of positing it. One that is emptiness, and then other the seed for Buddha bodies. But according to the highest Yoga Tantra, it is said that we have the Buddha nature within ourselves, and because of that fact, in certain tradition, it is said that we are Buddha, right? Primordially Buddha. So that means we are all Buddhas right from primordially. So if we are real Buddhas, then why do we have suffering? Why do we need this education? Why do we have the sufferings of birth, aging, death, and sickness? And this, there is argument. If we have the natural nirvana, as the Buddha nature is sometimes termed, then why is there need for sentient beings to strive to cultivate the path? And in Chandideva's Bodhicharya Avatara, this question is raised and then answered. So in the highest Yoga Tantra, the subtlest, the finest mind, which is called the luminous mind, with that in mind, then the primordial Buddhahood is used. That is termed as the primordial Buddha, because that is the ultimate potential for us to become a Buddha. And that is also, according to the highest Yoga Tantra, termed as the Svabhavakaya, the nature body of a Buddha. So that's the reason why there's the reference to this Buddha nature as being the primordial Buddha. So the question is, this life that we have now is the result of our previous, and what we will be in the future will depend on what we do now. And we see that when we become sick, that is referred to as being the product of bad karma, and when we have some good experience in this life, that is referred to as being effect of good karma. Can we change karma? The basic question is. So with regard to karma, there is the karma which gives rise to its effect in the immediate next life. And then there are karmas which give rise to the effects in this very lifetime. So these karmas may be created in the earlier part of your life, and then the product or the effect or the result is ripens in this very life, in the later part of your life. So we have pains and pleasures accordingly, based on such karmas. In Abhidhamma Samuccaya of Asanga, merely to talk merely about causality, perhaps we do not need to talk about karma as such. So of course, if you say that when we see the petals of flowers fall one after the other, is that because of karma? I would say no. But when we talk about karma, it has to be explained or understood within the context or in reference to someone who has a feeling or sensation. So I would say that the flower has come from its own cause, and that cause or seed has its own previous seed and so forth. But then on the other hand, the suffering and pleasant experiences we have are said to be beginningless. So Shantideva's text makes this point very clear, that our pleasure and pleasure experiences and suffering they come from the causes which are beginningless. And once I was teaching the Lama Tsongkhapas' great treatise on the path to enlightenment, I asked some scholars who were there if on a high mountain, a snow mountain, then if from the snow 2 drops of water fell on 2 different spots, it's just because of karma. One of the scholars said that, the karmic process of karma is something inconceivable to us. So Asanga's Abhidhamma Samuccaya mentions that our experiences of pleasure and pain are the results of karma. So basically we can talk about a law of causality that causes and conditions give rise to their effects. On top of that, then when certain action or certain cause is created with certain motivation, then those causes which may be created through our body or speech or mind are said to be karma. So these experiences of pleasure and pain are experienced by someone who has sentiency and not the flowers and inanimate objects. And therefore, when some action is driven by our motivation, that those actions give rise to the plain pleasure and experiences of plain pleasure and so forth. And therefore, we can talk about karma. And therefore, the karma which is created, which is created by someone in the beginning of, in the earlier part of their life, can become give rise to its effect in the later part of their life. For example, when you rise up in the morning and has a calm state of mind, then you'll be happy the rest of the day as well. And then to take that within the context of your education, you are doing your education, receiving your education, and finally to live, to make a living in your life, and then to have good husband or wife, and to have a good job and so forth. So your education, you put effort, and then the result will come in the form of your jobs and so forth. So that's karma. And students who are peers in the same class, and then when you go to university and then graduate from university, one of you would have a job and the other will not have. So the ones who do not have it, who doesn't get a job, will rather stay, feel sad about not having a job and so forth. Whereas the ones who have job, who get job, will be happy. So there are people in the materially advanced countries who have really high level of education, but then very unhappy, and they have to take tranquilizers and so forth. Whereas there are others who do not have any kind of job or education and so forth, but live a very poor life, but still are happy. So if you can educate yourself in the modern subject as well as internally, then you'll be happy. So it's saying that His Holiness once gave a lecture on environmental protection or protection of animals and so forth, and that has really had a great impact in Tibet. And then the question was about weapons. The people are taking to weapons guns and so forth. And so please comment on this. So he's only saying that he will talk about this, give comments on this when he would be when he's in Bodh Gaya and in the winter. Of course, we are talking basically about non-harming others or practicing non-violence and so forth. So that includes not taking up guns and knives and so forth. So I met some people who said that they have bee farms somewhere in Bengal. When people go to hunt for honey in the forest, then on the way, what happens is every year about 80 people are attacked by preyed by tigers, and because of that, the villages, in the villages, many women become widows, and the rest of the village people considers this woman as being some kind of a bad omen and look down upon her. And so this is very sad, I found. So in such a case, perhaps people need some guns. So when they are attacked by tigers, they can at least shoot the tigers. So except in such exceptional cases, I don't know the need for weapons in Tibet, for example. So good morning to His Holiness, he says. Good. I'm sorry, I can't understand this dialect. Strong dialect. Amdo dialect sounds like. Kisilo Santa wala tido. Good. So His Holiness is asking him to make the point succinctly. What is the main point? So if the consciousness comes from the time beginningless, has come since time beginningless, why can we not say that this consciousness of ours is the person himself or herself? So even on the conventional level, to our mind, we talk about my mind. So there is this notion of master and his possession. The master being yourself, and the mind being the possession. So of course there are philosophical schools which say that so long as you hold on to some kind of philosophical stance whereby the I, you say the I or the person has to be found from within our psychophysical aggregates, and therefore you have the Chittamatra saying that we have Alaya Vijana, which is the identity, the final identity of the person, They say that we create karma, and the karma cannot go to waste, and it has to the karma has to leave its imprint on something, and therefore they posit this alaya vijnana, or the foundation consciousness. And then there are certain other schools of thought which do not accept this alaya vijnana, but then still they have the view that the person's identity has to be the sixth mind. But from the point of view of the highest philosophical school of Prasanghikas, then we do not have to have such a view of having a person that we can point to as being from within the aggregates, the psychophysical aggregates. So the sensory perceptions cannot be the person, whereas the sixth consciousness, with regard to that, if you say the sixth consciousness is the person, then during the waking state, the consciousness at the waking state is not there when you are in sleep. And then there, within the sleep state, you have a deep sleep, and then also dreaming state of mind. So where do we posit, or which one do we identify as being the sixth sense, the person as such? So if you posit the sixth sense as being the person, then the person, you would have to say that the person at the waking state is not there during the sleep state. So the manifest mind is, because it is not there during deep sleep, the person is not there. And then when you go into the process, go through the process of dissolution at the time of dying, you go through what are known as the four states of four empty states, and then finally that of the clear light or the luminous state of mind. So at that point, the person now cannot be there. So if the person, if you have to posit or point to the sixth mind as being the person, then the clear light mind has to be posited as being the person, and so it's very difficult to say that the sixth mind is the person. So you cannot, in other words, point to any of the psychophysical constituent factors as being the person as such. So of course, when we talk about a person, the psychophysical aggregates become the basis for the designation of the persons. So if you have to posit or assert that the sixth consciousness is the person, then you are actually saying the basis for the designation of the person is the person himself, which shows goes to say that by which you would have logical fallacies of the actor and the agent being the one. So he's talking about the people going into trance when some deities enter them. So he only says, I don't know exactly what to say, but there are So it seems that the question was about whether there are two different minds in the person who goes into trance when some deity possesses or them. It seems that there are some mediums of oracles who can feel that their own mind is also, who can experience their own mind while they are in trance as well. So I had some talk with some people who wish to do some research on the oracles. And I said to them, they would need permission of the oracles, the deities themselves first. Otherwise, without the permission of the deities themselves who enter the people, the medium, perhaps the deity or the oracle would rather sort of beat up the researcher. So we have the phenomenon of Tugdam, which is to say that people who have clinically died can stay and do stay in the body for some time. And we are doing some research on this. And once we are successful in this, then perhaps we can extend the same kind of research to the oracles as well. So we have oracle mediums who are very humble when they're in their own skin, but once they go into trance with the deities, then they're very active, unlike the person they were. So some deities, some oracles are quite strange. In Kanze Monastery in Kham in the 1950s, when I visited that, one of the oracles said they were Nechung. And usually Nechung, when Nechung comes in Lhasa, when Nechung goes into trance, the medium goes into trance, the Nechung would not offer his katak on my head or neck, but that oracle in Kanze Monastery went into trance and then was trying to put the katak on my neck. So. And then in another monastery in Chokra, one medium went into trance, saying that he was the deity was that of Shugden. And when my Lord Chamberlain came near that medium, the medium was feeling rather a little bit uneasy when he saw the Lord Chamberlain. So what happened there, I was quite surprised. Why would the deity feel uneasy when the Lord Chamberlain came nearby him? And I asked what was the reason, and the Lord Chamberlain said that he actually, the previous day, he had scolded the medium of the oracle, and that's why on that day when he went into trance, he was feeling uneasy when he saw the Lord Chamberlain. So that's quite a strange thing. It's not very sure whether the person has really gone into trance or not. And at one point, another story is that one oracle medium went into trance, and during the trance, the oracle had kind of said during a losar, and the oracle had said one of the sheep hands, that are displayed on made of dough and butter, that are displayed on the altar, should be given to the medium himself. And then after the trance was over and his attendants were packing up the things and so forth, the medium was still sitting there expecting something. And when the attendants didn't say anything, then he finally had to speak out, saying, wasn't there some talk about this dough and butter sheep had? So out of desperation, he said that. And then there's another story where a father instructed his son, who was supposed to go into trance, and the child was rather nervous about it. And the father said, you have to lift up your heel, and then when you do that, your toes would be on the ground, on the floor, and then after a while your feet would rather shake, and then people would consider that to be going into trance, and then you can say whatever you feel like to say, because some of them may be true. And so there was a test. So with regard to Nechung Doji Chagden, when the matter that was to be asked to the Nechung, when it's very important, after the oracle went into trance, then his hat would be taken off, because if the real Doji Chagden possessed some kind of imprint of
from Nobulinga, just reciting mantras, and it's not about participating in the rituals. So majority of us here are university students, and my question is, can you please advise us on how to practice Buddhism by embodying the spirit of the Bodhisattva, while we have to deal with, because most Tibetan youth, we feel that we have the responsibility to advance our own people through succeeding in academic fields. So my question is, how can we embody the spirit of Bodhisattva while having to deal with rigorous and very stressful academic settings?
I am telling the people, the Buddhist way of practice is using human intelligence maximum way, through that way transform our emotion. That's a Buddhist practice, Buddhist way of practice, not just a faith. Therefore, Buddha himself is made clear that all my followers, monks and scholars, should not accept my teaching out of your faith and devotion, but rather thorough investigation and experiment. So that is a very scientific way of sort of the approach. So therefore, we must study how to sort of through study, full of knowledge about the world of the emotion. When we say mind, emotion, something like one sort of the solid one thing.
One entity.
Not that way. When we talk emotion, when we talk consciousness, mind, it is vast sort of field. So, in order to transform our emotion, we have to know the whole system, whole reality. So, then we should know the destructive emotions such as anger, hatred, fear. So, in order to deal with these destructive emotions, we must know the counterforce or antidote or counterforce of these negative emotions. With full knowledge, the system of the emotion, then in order to reduce this destructive emotion, we must increase their counterforce, like that. So first, you must study. Nowadays, quite available in English, in English, about Buddhism, about Buddhism. So study, more study. And then, as a Tibetan, we need modern education. We must catch up with the modern world. So modern education is very, very important. But at the same time, the modern education user ourselves, modern education, very little the ability to provide inner peace. So without inner peace, even the modern education, modern technology cannot utilize properly. It can be destructive. So ultimately, no matter what sort of system, very good system, very good sort of, because in the economy field, or political field, or judiciary field, everywhere, this is a very good system. But ultimately, depend on the person who implement these things. Even very beautiful laws, judiciary system, but person who carry this judiciary work corrupt, then the judicial system itself sometimes is corrupt. So economy, capitalist economy sort of, because of the dynamic sort of force, very good, but lack of moral principle, it creates huge gap, rich and poor. Billionaire increasing, number of billionaire increasing, but poor people still remain poor. Sometimes even you see worse. Look, United States, richest country, number of billionaire increasing, isn't it? But poor people still remain there poor. Even Washington, the capital, and suburbs, Washington, many poor people. Recently I was in Newark. Every night some murder case happened. Our meeting, the mayor of the Newark city participated. He mentioned that very day, our meeting, he mentioned last night somewhere murder and he lost his sleep. He mentioned that. So in Chinese case, basically the social system is good, but the person who implementing that, then corrupted mind, a very communist idea, originally serving for poor people, working class people, but eventually power itself ruined their way of thinking. And then, so the corruption in every level, even religion, often you see corrupt because of that, something wrong with religion, not that way, but because of the person who carry teaching of Buddhism or teaching of religion corrupted in their mind, lack of principle. So therefore, modern education, more or less, the materialistic sort of approach, not sufficient. Today's many human created problem, not due to lack of education, but lack of moral principle. So therefore, we should pay the both sides, moral principle, warm-heartedness, justice, honest, truthful, compassion. Other side, modern education. Modern education is like instrument or our hand. The moral principle is the real controller of our head. So modern education alone, not sufficient. So you should pay more attention how to transform our negative emotion, destructive emotion. So that's the way. So for that, you should know, or you should have fuller knowledge about the system of the mind or emotion. Like that. Next question.
He's saying that basically His Holiness emphasizes on having both the education of the traditional subjects as well as modern subjects. So does the traditional subject here refer to our own different fields, such as the secular subjects that we have traditionally, or does it mean that of the Buddhism? So when we talk about Tibetan culture or tradition, it is very clear that the Tibetan culture and tradition has to very influenced by Buddhism.
So usually I describe Buddhist culture. So Buddhism for individual case, for individual business. Buddhist culture is the community, related to the community.
So a culture which is influenced by or which has connection with Buddhism. So of course we have what we call the 5 minor and 5 major fields of learning, which are all taken from India. So such as those of Sanskrit learning art, and then the epistemology or logic, and then inner science or Buddhism. So regarding arts, all the technology, modern technology can be included within it. So it's a very vast subject. When it comes to inner science, or it has to do with mind or moral science, logic and epistemology maybe can be used in any other subjects, because we're using logic and reasoning. So I have no detailed advice how to go about with this. So you have to consult the experts on these. So the questions. So compounded things change momentarily. So if things change momentarily, then we cannot point to something being present in the present moment. So if that is the case, then how do we talk about past and future? Because it's said that past and future are posited in relation to the present. So of course, if you try to find the object, whatever it is, from within the thing that is given a certain name, then you cannot, if you search for it. But we have to still posit things on the conventional level. So if we break down a month, we come to a week, and then weeks, and then each week is made of days, and days are made of hours and hours, and minutes by seconds, and so forth. So you cannot find anything if you do such.
Here I have two questions, and the first, my question is, since His Holiness represents the eyes, voice, beauty, and everything of Tibet, Tibet, therefore the relationship between Your Holiness and with the Tibetans is something more than that of a leadership. So I'm very afraid that during your absence, with the Tibetans going to face a very lots of difficulties like commuting society and etc. So my question is, how should we prepare ourselves to face that situation, and how long you are going to live for us, not only for us, but for the entire sentient beings? And my second question is, when we look to the four different sects of Buddhism, we find that there is no one in Gelugpa sect who has got enlightenment in his lifetime. So why it is so? Thank you. When we look to the four different sects of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, I mean, we find that there is no one in Gelugpa sect who has got enlightenment in Gelugpa sect who has got enlightenment in his lifetime. Thank
you.
Firstly, since my childhood, I notice drawbacks or some injustice in our old system. So, soon after I took the responsibility, a temporal responsibility, I think 1950 I took the responsibility. Then 52 I set up a reform committee to change some reform, but not successful due to certain circumstances. Then after 59 April, we reach India. Then 60 on, we start work for democratization. 10 years ago, 2001, we already achieved elected political leadership. Since then, my position is a semi-retired position. Semi-retired means, before that, our Kashak almost, I think, once a week, or sometimes once 2 weeks, meeting, discuss. Since 2001, almost none meeting with Kazoda, whole Kasha. Only elected political leadership, Professor Sandorumche. So occasionally we met. So all the major decision already transferred in the hands of elected political leadership. So I call myself semi-retired position. Now 10 years passed. Then I felt, now this is the right time, now to hand it over all as the political responsibility. And also another sort of reason. I always is telling people, when some people ask me, that the religious institution and the political institution must be separate. And I always feel the kings, queens, or religious sort of spiritual leaders
ruling
rule the temporal responsibility. That's outdated. Must end. Recently, I met some sort of media people, including one English. I jokingly told him, like the England sort of royal family, of course, individually, I really admire and sort of respect, great sort of admiration, respect with great admiration. But however, their system is outdated. I mentioned. So while I'm telling other with full confidence, religious institution, political institution must be separate. Then if the person asks me, why you? As a Dalai Lama, spiritual leader, Dalai Lama institution also used to have this responsibility of both spirituality and political. So my statement, my expression is hypocrisy. I always against a hypocritical sort of attitude. Many sort of government, particularly Chinese case, Chinese communist, full of hypocrisy, doing something different, saying something nice. So therefore, you say, I believe truthful, honest, transparent. So therefore, sooner or later, this system must change, must end. So then, while I judging the situation about among people, the spirit of democracy and the sense of sort of commitment about promotion of democracy and election, these things, I felt, I really impressed. So I felt now right time. So, and then Dalai Lama, the first Dalai Lama, second Dalai Lama, third Dalai Lama, fourth Dalai Lama, only spiritual leader, no political sort of responsibility. Only fifth, it happened. So therefore, why not? Now, later part of 14th Dalai Lama, return their original sort of practice, only spiritual field, no political. And political responsibility must take elected person, by the elected person. So like 10th March, my statement, I mentioned, and recently I was in Japan, at last year, one occasion in Hiroshima, I mentioned, I expressed, world belongs to humanity, not government. Then my statement also, I mentioned, China belongs to Chinese people. So like India belongs to Indian people, about 1 billion Indian people. So that does not mean they govern India by each sort of 1 billion Indian. That cannot do. So the best way to rule, to govern the country through election. Through election, the elected person, then truly representing of the people. Then carry the responsibility, look after the country. That also 4 years, 5 years. Then again new election. If something goes wrong, no confidence, vote of non-confidence, then change. These are best system. Our old system is outdated. Now, after this change, Tibetan exile administration now truly become democratic sort of institution, where in Peking, very much lacking that. We are truly democratic organization. So I feel really proud. So now you should sort of develop more sense of responsibility. Tibetan issue is issue of the nation, not Dalai Lama's issue, as Chinese governments say. No, this is issue of 6 million Tibetan people. So a struggle of that, people should take full responsibility. So through election, someone come, and that Kasota,
elected leader,
he carry this also the responsibility on behalf of the people. So Dalai Lama, yes, mainly spiritually, faith there. People loves me, people trust me. So then, if you really trust me, then I handed over this voluntarily, happily, proudly. You must trust. You see, this new sort of
administration,
what's arrangement like that. Like that. So I think it's mentioned here. I think tomorrow our speaker and the newly elected person going to speak, makes some sort of talk here. So you will know more clear picture. Like that. Second part. I think that due to your ignorance, the well-known person like
Tsongkhapas,
Ketu Nosa Kyazo, Vansapa, any Asaji, Drujin Chodorji, and many of them well-known achieve Buddhahood within the life, within one life. So like Ketu Nosa Kyazo, the second Dalai Lama's guru, perhaps I think biography or something. I think he mentioned, he referred Kirum Nosan Kyazo because you see he received some teaching from him. So he mentioned the Nosan Kyazo within few months will achieve Buddhahood. I think second Dalai Lama, I think naturally not liar. So I think he speak the truth. He must speak the truth. So his biography, you see, mentioned that, and that's well known. And then also, you see, recently I saw one sort of monk in eastern in Kham area. When I wrote his sort of some
writings,
certain sort of his expression, it seems really reach high level. Like that. So genuine practitioner, very rare state, I reach such sort of level. That those people, like yesterday's question, those monks or lamas who actually aiming money or sex or name, these sometimes you see claim, oh, they already reached very high level. So when you met one lama, you must investigate whether that lama or person who claim some spiritual leader, you must investigate as Buddha stated. That's very important. Now last question.
So there's no beginning to the mind. So does it change, this mind which has no beginning and end, does it change according to time and other factors? So how do we know that it changes? So do you become angry sometimes? So when you're angry, does it really make you unhappy? So if it does, then that's a change within you. So you cannot think of mind as being one single entity. There are many different types of mind within yourself. So in connection with the objects that you perceive, the mind changes. For example, if you hear a music, when you listen to music with your ears, you have a mind, the thought, which is thinking about the music. And similarly, when you see something with your eyes, there is a thought which is directed towards the sight. So this mind cannot be the same as the mind which was thinking about the music, because that conception or the thought about the music cannot stay forever there. So when you are totally absorbed in some sight, in some form or object that you see, because of that absorption, even if you may hear some music, you will not be aware of it. And similarly, the various states of mind or thought processes happen to us, and then they also subside at some point. When a person dies, then the consciousness which is of that person also ceases to be a consciousness of a human being. And then the mind dissolves into some kind of very subtle state. So just as you have within the body, the gross, subtle, and the subtlest states or forms, similarly in the mind there are these different levels. So you can study about these different states of mind and discuss with others. It will become so on a superficial level, you may think mind is a huge one entity. But in science, modern science, there is not much explanation of the mind in detail. But ancient Indian psychology, and especially the Buddhist psychology, it's very rich in in regard to explanation of mind. So if you have to study, and then you will learn about these things. Thank you. Some kind of concrete, independent existence. So when you look at things as having that kind of, or perceiving things to have that kind of existence, then that conception is distortion. So that is a bondage. how does it bind us? So when you see, for example, something which is attractive, you have this perception or conception that that attractiveness is independently existing from the side of the object. There's some kind of absolute independently existing attractiveness in the object. And that kind of attraction or the clinging. And similarly, with anger, this happens. So because of these two, we can see all kinds of problems arising from the problems in the family up to the global level, or from problems in the global level. And we think of victory for oneself and defeat for others. Of course, nobody is thinking about it, some kind of eternal happiness, but just some kind of temporary satisfaction and happiness. And because of short-sightedness, we cause ourselves more problems. And the different big countries lay down their policies. With a broad view and understanding the reality as it is, precisely, correctly, then even the policies are based on such short-sighted views of some long short-term goals without having that broad perspective of things. And because of greed, whatever we do, we are not able to see the long-term disadvantage or the shortcomings of their effects. So what is seen through conception is bondage, and that is seized or stopped by understanding the suchness or reality. So our mind, a conceptual mind or thought, perceives as if things have some kind of independent existence. So there is such a way of looking at things, and because of that, the attachment and anger are produced. So therefore, the means to stop such a conceptual thought is to understand that things do not exist in the way they perceived to be by this kind of conception. And therefore you can reduce this kind of attachment or clinging to such an independent way of existence of things. And therefore the 400 verses of Aryadeva says, if things have independent existence, then what is the need to see emptiness? And the ignorance of true reality pervades or permeates all kinds of destructive emotions. So what is this ignorance? How do we destroy it? The next Aryadeva goes on to say, if you see that of interdependent nature of things, then this kind of ignorance will not arise. So, for example, if we perceive oneself to have some kind of a permanent, unitary, autonomous existence, which is a gross form of grasping at self of a person. So similarly, there are other gross forms of clinging or to some kind of a soul or independent existent, permanently existent of a person. So by realizing the opposite of those gross forms of self identity of things, we will not be able to overcome the very subtle or the subtlest form of clinging to true existence. And therefore, if you are able to see the subtle selflessness, the subtlest selflessness, then you'll be able to overcome the rest of the clinging on to some kind of a self-identity of a person. And therefore, I never say that if you see that of dependently arisen nature of things, then the ignorance will not arise. So how is it that this can happen? In the fundamental wisdom of Nagarjuna, it says, what is dependently arisen is said to be empty. And and what is dependently designated, that it's itself said to be the middle way. And so what Nagarjuna is saying, that if things are dependent on other factors, and therefore they do not have any self-existence, so whatever is dependently arisen is declared to be empty. So of course, when we talk about emptiness, do not get the idea that all the different philosophical systems within Buddhism assert this view of emptiness. Whereas on the other hand, we have the theistic religions, which believe in the creation of God. And so when they submit themselves to God and accordingly tackle the destructive emotions. And in Buddhism, we talk about those of impermanence, suffering, empty nature, and conceptual clinging as a bondage. And that is overcome by the seeing suchness. So what we are trying to negate here is not the things that exist, such as forms, the material, the matter, sound, smell, and so forth. But what we are negating here is that of true existence of things, that kind of an independent existence. So if we deny the existence of matter and sound and so forth, then it goes against our own experience, because we can see these things, hear the sound and so forth. So if we go against it, is going against our own actual experience. So although the form and sound and so forth do exist, the way they exist is merely by way of designation, merely in name. They do not have any kind of objective existence from their own side. And therefore the purpose of emptiness is to stop that kind of clinging. Islam is looking for some lines. So he's asking the Geshe-las on his right side. Nobody is able to respond. So the form and so forth, the form and south and so forth, are not what we are negating, it, the quotation says. But what we are negating is, so the cognition of form and sound and so forth are not what is denied or rejected. But what we are trying to overcome is that of the conceptual thought or mind, conceptions which cling at some kind of independent existence of things. So how do we overcome this kind of conception which clings to some independent existence or true existence of things? Ayadeva moves on to say that just as the bodily sensation pervades the whole body, all of our sensory faculties, likewise all our afflictive thoughts and emotions or delusions or destructive emotions are pervaded by or permeated by the clinging or the perception of true existence. So here he uses the analogy of the bodily sensation pervading all the rest of the sensory faculties. So likewise, the other destructive emotions such as attachment and anger, of course, they do not permeate. They don't permeate all kinds of destructive emotions, but ignorance. Congratulations to you. So I've been a little bit late today because I had a meeting with some external ministry of Indian government, some retired officers, and we discussed about the Tibetan situation today and the relationship between Tibet and India and all this. So because of this, I was a little bit late. I'm sorry about this. As we discussed yesterday, I said we have to become 21st century Buddhists. So from the point of view of followers with sharp faculty, we have to first understand the Dharma. So the very term Chu in Tibetan or Dharma in Sanskrit means to protect us. So the understanding of emptiness, or the understanding or view of interdependence, which is unique to Buddhism. No other religious tradition or other traditions have this view. And this view of interdependence is something which is a fact and reality. So you don't have to rely on mere faith. But anybody can understand that things arise or come about through dependence on other factors. So therefore, when you understand this interdependent nature of things, you'll understand the causality of things, that effects arise from causes. And then we also come to the conclusion of understanding or the practice of taking up the causes which bring about happiness and avoiding or overcoming the causes which bring about suffering. So what is the significance of this understanding of interdependent nature of things? In the 70 stanzas of Nagarjuna, he says, and so independence on ignorance, the fundamental ignorance about the nature of causality, and independence on that, the rest of this 12 links, the 11 factors in the 12 link dependent origination arises. So in the depiction of the 12 links in the paintings, you will see in the center of the painting the three animals, the pig, a bird, and a snake. And so these represent the three poisons of attachment, ignorance, and anger or hatred. And so when we count the 12 links of Tibetan origination, we have the first, the of ignorance, which leads to that of the karmic formation, and then consciousness and so forth. So of course nobody wants suffering, but everyone wants happiness. But we cause ourselves sufferings because of ignorance about what causes or brings about happiness and what are the causes for suffering. And therefore, with regard to ignorance itself, with the first link, the ignorance is the ignorance about the true nature of things, the reality as it is. In other words, things are dependently originated or arising, whereas to our mind, the things which are caused by causes and conditions to appear as if they exist the way they look to us. So when you think about causality, when you say that there are causes and conditions and then their effects, we think as if there is something out there concretely existing as causes and conditions and their effects. And so in what is caused, what arises through causes and conditions, thinking or perceiving them to have some kind of real existence out there from their own side, is this kind of view or perception is a distorted perception. And so that is what the Buddha has said to be ignorance. So we're going to the verse quoted earlier. And the 400 verses of Aryadeva says that if things have some kind of intrinsic existence, then what is the need for the Buddha to teach emptiness? So if things have some kind of intrinsic independent existence, then there's no point in saying that things are empty of such an independent existence. So if things were to have some intrinsic existence, then saying that things are empty of intrinsic existence and holding such a view would be a distortion. So Aryadeva is saying that if things have some kind of independent existence, then there is no point in talking about emptiness and seeing empty nature of things. And what is seen through conception is a bondage, it is said. So this kind of bondage, the conception, is some kind of distorted perception, distorted conception. What that means is clinging to the independent nature of things as they appear to us. So we kind of have this strong clinging and that things exist in the way they appear to us, which is to say that they appear to us as if they have